pleasure is our nature. If you consider the clitoris, it has thousands of nerves and it has no other function than pleasure. So, denying ourselves pleasure is literally denying ourselves our nature.
You're listening to Personal Development Mastery, the podcast that empowers you with the simple and consistent actions you need to master yourself and create a life of purpose and fulfillment. I'm your host, Agi Keramidas, and this is episode 370. If you feel disconnected from your body and sexuality, you are not alone. Many of us have been conditioned by society and past experiences to deny our natural capacity for pleasure. In today's episode, you will learn how reconnecting with your senses, embracing pleasure, and reclaiming your sexual empowerment can not only help you cope better with difficult emotions, but also to expand your capacity for joy and fulfillment in your life. And of course, throughout the episode, you will discover simple practices to reconnect with your sexual power and sensual pleasure. Let's dive right in. Today, I am delighted to speak with Dr. Fanny Leboulanger. Fanny, you have embarked on a unique journey from being a family doctor practicing gynaecology to becoming a sex coach and an advocate for self-love and pleasure. Combining modern scientific concepts with ancient tantric traditions, you are passionate about helping women reclaim their sexual empowerment and live their best lives filled with pleasure and fulfillment. Fanny, welcome to the show. I'm so happy to have you here with me today.
Thank you for having me. I'm so happy to. Thank you for everyone to listen to tune in as well.
I'm looking forward to this conversation, Fanny, and we will explore today self-love, sex, and how our capacity to feel pleasure is one of the greatest tools we have to create our life, which is, I find this a fascinating topic. Before we go there, I'd like to ask you to give us a bit more background about that transition in your career. So what was happening then and what triggered that shift?
The shift started a little bit before because I have like a really usual story of you don't want to listen to life until you get hit. So I got a diagnosis of epilepsy at age 26, which is kind of late. And I started to do a lot of self-inquiry, and I did a ton of self-development. And I started to feel there was something wrong because I spent more and more time speaking to myself, healing myself, and felt not as good as I thought I would be regarding the investment of time, money, and everything I put there. Mm-hmm. So I started to have doubts. And then what happened is two things at the same time. First, I realized that it wasn't normal actually to only get orgasms from my partner. And I heard so many people around me saying that was the same. And in my medical practice, because I'm doing gynecology on a daily basis, I started to see more and more women I had no answer to. They had pain during sex, for example, and all the exams were normal. And I was like, okay, you're going to see a sexologist who has 6 months of waiting time. And it was becoming more and more frequent. And I was like, I can't send 3/4 of my patients to a sexologist. And at the same time, one woman came and she said to me, "Doctor, I think I'm broken because I've never had an orgasm." And she was 34. And I was like, this is wrong. So I started to explore first for myself, second for my patients at the same time, discovered this beautiful world of sex coaching and sex positivity and the power of pleasure and sexual healing. And that's when I realized that's what I want to do. That's what I want my job to be. So I became a sex coach.
I enjoyed listening to this, the way you described your story, and I was not planning to take the conversation there in the beginning, but because you mentioned it, I will go there right at the very beginning, because you mentioned the orgasms, and there are misconceptions about the orgasms, and I suppose that those misconceptions were what led you to say that I'm broken. So can you share then what are some common misconceptions that, or cliches if you want, about orgasms, and how can a better understanding of this topic generally improve our life, or sex life in particular?
The first thing I like to remind every person I'm working with is that pleasure is our nature. If you consider the clitoris, it has thousands of nerves and it has no other function than pleasure. So, denying ourselves pleasure is literally denying ourselves our nature. And that being said, so orgasms shouldn't be hard. Not shouldn't. It's not written anywhere, or there is no physical, physiological explanations for orgasm to be so tricky for people. It became tricky because we live in a crazy situation with internalized sexism, patriarchy, and things like that, and people having opinions on what you should do with your sexual life and how, for example, if you consider orgasms, there is this thing about how, to be a real woman, you're supposed to come during penetration, whereas the most pleasurable orgasm isn't really inside the clitoris. Isn't like, there is the G-spot, of course, but I think the worst misconception is how we rate the types of orgasm.
Mm-hmm.
And also how we think orgasms are supposed to look a certain way, because we tend to forget or not know that we have different types of pleasure. You can have a luscious pleasure. You can have a soft pleasure. You can have a passionate pleasure. You can have an angry pleasure as well. You can get angergasm, sadgasm when you work with your emotions. So that's a whole palette that is available. And when you combine this with the exploration of your body, this is an endless playground.
It's certainly, the way you describe it, it certainly sounds like it. Why do you think many people deny that to themselves then?
Because that's we have been trained for, and that's how things are. So it's more a question of what do we do now, instead of denying it has happened. I also do want to specify that things are getting better, which is great. I love to acknowledge where we came from. During a trip to Asia, we met a guide who told us, I want to have my wife so that I can stop wondering of anything at home. So we have a ton of things to work on here, but we've come a long way. And
that's great. Thank you. I'm going to go back to something I alluded earlier in the introduction about the capacity to feel pleasure. And you say that awakening or expanding our capacity to feel pleasure is one of the greatest tools one can have in creating the life that they want and finding fulfillment. So I would like to hear your thoughts on that. It's something that it certainly makes sense when you hear it, but I wonder how many of us practice it. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on it.
I'd love to start this answer with Has denying yourself pleasure worked before? Do you feel good when you deny yourself pleasure and when you beat yourself all day long to lose weight, do this, do that, have more orgasm, but too much and blah, blah, blah? Personally, it hasn't.
No.
Then, what I love about pleasure is how it helps us expand our safety zone in our nervous system, and how, because it's our nature, we slowly reclaim what's ours and how we actually deserve that. If you consider your nervous system, we have some kind of tolerance zone where we feel comfortable and we can manage the coming back at a quote unquote normal state. That's, for example, why you are not yelling at your spouse when they are just, a little bit late. And this tolerance zone can also be influenced by outside factors. We all have been in a huge fight and then noticed we were hungry. And then when we ate, we were like, oh, I was just hungry. So using pleasure, because it's our nature, help us expand that. And when we expand that, we are also able to notice what is wrong about us, not about us, about us as a society, and able to do something with it, to actually step out of what I call the autopilot life in this 50 Shades of Grey, not sexy way of how things are quote unquote, supposed to be. When you reclaim your pleasure, you reclaim your essence. And when you reclaim your essence, your tolerance to the bullshit that is not yours decrease. And when you decrease the tolerance to that, you have more fulfillment, or simply feeling truly alive is more accessible.
If you enjoy this episode, can you find one person you think would find it useful and share it with them? I'd really appreciate it. It helps the show grow, and you'll also be adding value to people you care about. Thank you. And now let's get back to the episode. You said reclaiming your essence, and that is, in my ears anyway, it sounds like a very spiritual thing to say. So the way you were describing pleasure, it sounded to me like, a path to grow spiritually also, not only as personal development, but and emotional understanding and all those things, but also spiritual. And actually wanted to ask you, because you combine the ancient tantric practices with the modern medicine, and I wanted to ask you also about, how does these different approaches complement each other in what you do?
A sentence that I love and I heard for the first time is how sex is the active form of meditation.
I have read that somewhere. Yes. Well, if you approach it in such, from such a frame of mind, yeah.
The combining of the ancient wisdom and the modern science is first to actually be aware of what is going on in your sexual system, how pleasure works, what type of organs do you have, literally sexy knowledge. And it's always helpful to know what's actually going on when you self-pleasure or solo play, when you are in a partnership. And all of these dynamics have been really well studied in modern science. And when you consider the ancient traditions, you can get all what's going on about the spiritual, quote unquote, world, about how we tend to live in an egoistical illusion and trying to differentiate what is the illusion or the autopilot and what is our true essence, and also learn how to live with it some spiritual traditions want us to transcend our human condition. I'm much more a fan of using these traditions to help us be here and experience the whole spectrum of it, the whole spectrum of this human experience. That means you will get the greatest joys and love and also the most epic shit and pain and get the tools to face all of that.
You said about, I agree with you wholeheartedly. You said about, how some traditions talk about transcending our human nature. And I thought we all will eventually. So we will transcend our human nature. Might as well, before we do that, really, as you said, to make the most or explore, I don't remember the phrase you used exactly, of our physical existence and everything that it can offer, not only to us, but also that's how I see it anyway, that through us to whoever else we is in our sphere of the ripple effect comes to mind. So
First, a wise mentor of mine said, if you weren't supposed to be here, you wouldn't be here. And I was like, huh, that's kind of true.
It sounds like one of those Zen sayings that it is so simple and it's very difficult to actually get it. But when you get it, I mean, it's so simple but once you actually get it, it is a proper revelation. I wanted to ask a little bit more to explain a bit or go a bit further on that deeper connection between pleasure, and let's keep it now to sexual pleasure so that we can also follow up later on in the conversation. So the connection, the deeper connection between the sexual pleasure and the life of fulfillment. You already mentioned some elements, but I would like to hear some more thoughts on that, because as I told you before we started recording, I find it utterly fascinating as a topic.
I discovered a concept during my training, and I'm sure many people heard about that before. It's the body-mind. So that's the intersection of what your body actually feels, like I'm cold, I'm hot, my heart is my feet or my arms are broken or whatever, and the mind. So the emotions, the explanations, and there is this sweet intersection in between where the mind can actually express, but in subtle sensations, a tingling, a feeling of any sort. And how these pieces, because they come from our mind, have some kind of consciousness, quote unquote consciousness. You can have a conversation with them, for example. You can get informations from them. And I'm going somewhere with this. When you have these conversations, when you realize why these pieces are here, then you get the clarity and they can be alchemized. And to have that, I mean, the simple example is noticing that if you have an inner child that wants to protect your heart from, the pain, then until you feel the pain and help the inner child release that, you will be stuck with this thing, literally alchemizing our traumas or conditioning. It helps. The saying goes, you need to feel it to heal it. And I also love to say, to add to that, you need to feel the sensations, not the story. And the good thing with pleasure, as I mentioned earlier, is how it helps our nervous system to tolerate that. So we're not overthrown by the pain, by the guilt, we mix it, it becomes more tolerable. And when you use that to digest your conditioning, to alchemize your traumas, you're actually coming closer to who you want to be instead of who you have been conditioned to be.
I love this answer. And you talked about the tolerance, which you mentioned earlier on in the conversation, but now I really got it in a different way, because the way I understood, and tell me if that's what comes out, well, it came from me, but let me know if it is what you were saying, that by expanding our tolerance, by having more pleasure or different kinds of pleasure and all those things, at the same time we are also expanding our capability to handle the other side of the spectrum, which is pain. And I suppose you did not mean just physical pain. I suppose you also, so talk to me more about this.
What I like to share is, when you work on your money beliefs, for example, you can tell yourself, I love money, money loves me. If somewhere in your system you have integrated that having money is not safe because someone said something mean while you were a kid or whatever, you can tell your system money is safe. Inside it will be integrated as, no, money equals danger. So you're going to stay away unconsciously from money, so self-sabotaging and things like that. And that goes in our sexuality too. When we've been trained and told as women how owning our sexuality, owning our desire is unsafe because of rape culture, because of judgment, because of things like that, there is such work to do there that is so important. And when you reclaim that safety zone, you can alchemize everything because you digest the physical sensations, and at their core, emotions are just physical sensations given meaning by your brain. At the very basic, you can have a quick heart rate because you're angry, but also because you're seeing your lover, or because let's put it that way. And also, you can be angry with a small and steady heartbeat, with a cold anger, for example. So at the end of the day, this is just sensations. And the beauty with sensations, it's just that it is that allowing them space to proceed without getting attached to the story helps them get released. And when they get released, you don't hold on to them anymore because they lose the power. How many of us are afraid to get angry because all the anger we have is going to just blow up into the face of the person in front of us? And so that's why it's literally the intersection of physical pain and, psychological pain.
Mm-hmm. This is great. I what you were saying earlier, that the emotions are physical sensations when the mind creates a story about them, and that's also in our power to reframe that story. As you were saying, the faster heart rate can mean all sorts of different things, or can be caused by all sorts of different sensations, but it is up to us to name that story. The story is not, even though we have default stories that we come back to, but we have the power to choose the story. And the example I say sometimes is, when you have the butterflies in the stomach, when you are feeling, you can say that I'm stressed and terrified, or you can say I'm very excited. Both of them will create that. So just that as adding to what you were saying about the emotion, you mentioned reclaiming the power. I think that was a phrase you used, and owning the sexuality, that was another phrase that you used. So I would like to ask specifically for the women listening, what role does that play, or sexual power or the owning our sexuality. I don't know I think they are related in some way, if I'm correct. So what role does that play for a woman towards creating the life that they want? And even more importantly, how can they start to change their relationship with it, or start, progressing with it?
Regarding the progression, it starts simple. So many of us think that to heal our sexuality, we need to have orgasms lasting for hours and where we yell, yes, yes, like a bad porn movie. Whereas true healing starts small. If you have been numb, if you have been disconnected for your body forever or for decades or even for years or months, if you start self-pleasuring and you don't want it, this is not going to heal you. If you want to, please go forward. But so first, there is this reconnection to your senses, and that can start small. Tasting a piece of chocolate, using sensual oil that smell amazing to give yourself massage. I always like to offer to my coachees to start with breast massage because our breasts store so much emotions. And it's also an quote unquote easy way to start the release. Some people are terrified by their genitals or disgusted or anything like that. And I think the most important part here is to really honor the pace and not force yourself. And looking for pleasure moment to moment. Pleasure can just be a sensual touch on your shoulders at first. And if that's the only thing that's pleasurable, stay with that. And then when you expand your pleasure capacity, so you notice pleasure is safe, then you will want something else. Mm-hmm. And that's, the reintegrating that pleasure is safe, that you are allowed to do that, is really, it goes into fulfillment, in my opinion, because when you do that, you become more and more whole. And that's an opinion of mine. Of course, take it or leave it. You cannot truly feel alive 100% experiencing all of it if you're not whole. We cannot selectively numb if we are afraid of our grief, if we are afraid of our sadness, if we are afraid of our anger, especially because we have the right to be angry, sad, and mad at society and the mess that is going on around us. It can be so overwhelming. So we can be so afraid of that. And because it's so terrifying, we suppress it. And then it's just a matter of time how, when you suppress one, the others are becoming more and more gray, and you end up numb, and you end up what I call the autopilot. That is the opposite of fulfillment, and pleasure helps you step out of that.
That's a wonderful answer, Fanny. Thank you very much. It's actually been a really fascinating conversation, and I will start to wrap it up in a moment, and I do have some final quick questions to ask you. Before I do, will you share with the listener that has absolutely been intrigued by what you're saying, and where can they find out more about you and connect?
The best way to figure out who I am and what I do is to listen to my podcast, which is called Your Sexified Life. Keep the Y at sexified. Because I'm French, I didn't know how to write that. But so it's called Your Sexified Life. You can find it everywhere. You can also send me an email at hello@yoursexifiedlife.com. And I could give you my Instagram for DMs because I don't use it. But if you want to send me a DM there, it's with Dr. Fanny. But you're aware it's not really sexy because I'm not really an Instagram girl.
That's great. Fanny,
I forgot. I'm sorry.
Yes.
Well, instead of talking about Instagram, I should have talked about the ebook. I wrote a free ebook, which is called Essence. It's Awaken Your Sexes. Interesting. Essence, Awakening Your Senses to Reclaim the Pleasure to Be Alive. It's available for free. It comes with my regular love letters. And I'd love to hear what you think about it.
Thank you. I think that is really valuable for someone that has resonated with the conversation today. So it's going to be in the show notes to go there and download it and read it. Fanny, I have a couple of last quick fire questions that I always ask my guests. And the first one is, what does personal development mean to you?
It's a great way to do some self-inquiry. Just not forget to actually stay here and do the real work that is way less sexy than going into amazing practices. Bringing the embodiment is key. And we need to be aware of that because that's how it works for real.
That's great. And hypothetically speaking, if you could go back in time and meet your, say, 18-year-old self, what's one piece of advice you would give her?
Don't go to med school. Don't go to med school. You're just going to waste 10 years. And yes, you will get a title, but turns out it's not really that necessary. And how true healing comes beyond that. I'm really happy I did it. It brings me some qualities that other people have not. But also there was a way to do things differently now that I see. And also you're normal. Stop wondering if there's something wrong with you. You're normal.
That's great. Fanny, I want to thank you very much. I enjoyed this conversation so much, and I believe there were some important messages there, and there is more awareness now about some things that more than it was before we started this conversation. So I really believe that that intention is fulfilled. I want to wish you all the very best with keeping on changing the lives of women and the people in their environment as a result of that, because it expands. Before we conclude today, I like to leave my listeners with some parting actionable wisdom. So what's one piece of advice, one simple practice you would recommend our listeners to incorporate into their life and, begin their journey towards better sex? Let's leave it to that question.
Reconnect to your senses. Even before going to sex, reconnect to your senses. Use essential oil that smell amazing to caress your body. If you want to go with your genitals, fine, but just start above if you need. Eat that piece of chocolate or strawberry or anything that feels amazing. And get yourself some movement. Start dancing for 5 minutes a day. Just because you need some movement to have your body functioning well, because that also alchemizes your traumas. Let's be honest. So awakening the senses and movement so that you can find space to then explore what's more sexual.
And before I end today's episode, an open invitation to you listening right now. I invite you to find me on social media and send me a direct message about anything you prefer. You can tell me who your favorite guest has been so far, or who you would like me to interview next, or what topic you would like to hear on the podcast. So drop me a line and I look forward to chatting with you. Until next time, stand out, don't fit in,